Welcome to the Big Talk podcast, where we chat all things business and personal development related, totally unfiltered and unscripted. I'm your host, Amanda Davies, and I'm here to help you transform into the leader you were born to be, stand apart from the competition, and most importantly, share your message with the world in a big, big way. Are you ready? Welcome once again to Big Talk. Hey, welcome back to this week's episode of the podcast. I'm excited to be here with you again. And before I jump into the content today, I just wanted to say a huge thank you to everyone who follows me here on SoundCloud or over on iTunes and who shouts me out on social media and people who share these episodes. It really, really does mean the world to me. I absolutely love creating this content for my community, and it just means a lot to know that it's appreciated and that people are really getting some amazing value from this too. So thank you to everyone who shares and obviously who messages me and who likes the content, gives me the little hearts and all that sort of stuff too. It really does mean an awful lot to me. So thank you very, very much. And this week's episode, I think you're going to really like because it's all about bypassing. All right. And I'm going to explain a little bit more about what bypassing is and the different types of bypassing in a minute. But this is a really interesting psychological phenomenon that we are all, dare I say, guilty of at some point in our lives. And bypassing from a psychological perspective is when we tend to move in and out of paying attention to the reality of our situation. Okay. I'm sure like the little bells are going off in your head already around when you have done this yourself, whether it's in relationships. It particularly plays out in relationships, by the way. It also just plays out sort of in life generally, but also in your business too. And that's kind of what I wanted to talk about in a little bit more detail today. And if you've been around for a while, I'm sure you've probably heard of the term spiritual bypassing. That's quite a common term, particularly in the online personal development and spiritual spaces. And spiritual bypassing, in case you haven't heard of it, tends to be defined as almost like using spiritual ideas and spiritual practices to sort of sidestep or avoid facing stuff that's unresolved within ourselves. So whether that are unresolved emotional issues or psychological wounds or developmental tasks, it's basically just a way for us to not have to look at the inner work and our responsibility that's playing out. So spiritual bypassing is really, really common. It's something, again, that if you're on a spiritual journey as well, I'm sure you've been guilty of this at some point. I know I certainly have too, where in order to avoid facing my pain or to avoid facing my own role in things, I've kind of thought, well, it's just what the universe wants for me right now. It's just sort of like throwaway comments like that, right? And what this can do is it really does stop us from paying attention to the reality of a situation and also our role within that reality. And you guys know that one of the really big first steps that we need to take if we are on a personal development journey, if we want to achieve the goals that we have for ourselves, we really do need to be based in reality, of course, whilst also having our eye on that bigger vision and that bigger dream that we have too. But we can't just have our eye on the bigger dream and the bigger vision if we're not prepared to confront what's really in front of us in the day-to-day moments. All right. And I'm going to sort of bring this to life with some examples in a minute. But really, this whole episode is about us waking up to the depths of our avoidance. Our avoidance, okay, we all do it as people. We avoid looking at the stuff that makes us uncomfortable. All right. We avoid it like the plague. And a lot of the times that is because we don't really like the consequences that has for us, whether that is a consequence around us having to change something within our lives, whether that's a consequence of us having to change something within our business or in our relationships, or whether the consequence is that we just put up and shut up with kind of what's in front of us. And that also feels kind of uncomfortable. All right. But all roads kind of point back to change. All right. And when we avoid things, what we're really avoiding is our growth. We're avoiding our change and what's being called and requested of us to move forward and really fulfill our potential. All right. So just to give you sort of an idea around what bypassing really looks like and how it shows up, just to kind of bring it to life a little bit. Sometimes it can look like as I said, sort of not wanting to see the truth about what is or isn't working, particularly in relationships, particularly in our business as well. Sometimes we get kind of caught up in the fantasy of what could be, or hold on to that hope sometimes as well that things could change without us really doing anything differently. All right, that's a form of bypassing. All right, not wanting to see the truth about what is or isn't working. Perhaps not wanting to feel the uncomfortable emotions that the reality is presenting us with. So those uncomfortable emotions might be, oh my God, I need to change something, or actually I need to break out of this relationship, or oh my God, I need to invest more money into advertising, or I need to do things differently with my sales process, or whatever. Change can be really uncomfortable for the majority of people. And so sometimes by us almost just sticking our head in the sand and avoiding what's really not working, it's a way for us to avoid that discomfort. Sometimes we bypass as well because we don't want to own up to our mistakes or the role that we've played in something not working. I see this quite a lot, things that have broken down, relationships that have broken down, things that maybe aren't working in our business. It's sometimes it's a lot easier for us to go to blame, or for us to point the finger at someone else, or to sort of almost just completely not pay attention to it or numb out to something, because we don't want to feel that we had a role to play in it. All right. And sometimes this can really support if we are carrying a bit of a victim mentality. Sometimes this really reinforces and supports that belief that we have that we are the victim. Okay. So just let that sink in. All right. It also happens because we're afraid to confront a situation or a part of ourselves that could feel overwhelming. If we are confronted with a huge problem in our lives, relationships, life, business, sometimes it can feel really overwhelming to acknowledge that, to know that there are so many moving parts to that situation, to that problem, things that need to change. To actually look at that and to understand that, yes, it needs to change, can feel really, really overwhelming. That feeling of overwhelm can produce all sorts of anxiety, burnout, depression, fear, sadness. So it really can trigger those big, uncomfortable emotions as well. So you can really kind of see the common theme here is that we are trying to avoid our deep emotions, avoid the uncomfortable deep emotions by bypassing. Sometimes, and this is a really interesting way that I've seen a lot of people bypass, particularly those in entrepreneurship, in the personal development and spiritual development industries, is that we're constantly in that space of self-analysis. Okay, constantly self-analyzing, and we're doing the inner work, all of that stuff, which I freaking love, by the way. But sometimes if that's not coming from a place of moving forward and active growth, it can actually be there because we're avoiding making contact with human reality. All right, because we're just doing the work over and over and over again, and we're always doing the analysis, we're always doing the next course, we're always reading the books and journaling and learning more about ourselves. But where do we actually start taking action? So sometimes, just calling it out, sometimes doing that work over and over again can actually just be a way for us to stay hiding, can actually be just a way for us to stay in that place of not making contact with reality and taking those scary steps forward into action, into creating the changes that we say we want to create in our lives too. So as I said, bypassing really does play out in our romantic relationships, family relationships, friendships as well, psychological and emotional bypassing in particular there, some of that which I just described, spiritual bypassing too, which I spoke about before, which is really using those kind of spiritual ideas and practices to sidestep our growth and to sort of avoid facing that sort of unresolved trauma or emotional issues or psychological wounds that we may have as well. But I want to talk a little bit about how bypassing shows up in business, because this is sort of an area that not a lot of people speak about. And I have been doing this work for a long time, and I've worked with hundreds, if not thousands of clients now, had thousands of conversations certainly around this. And I know that the way bypassing can show up in business is really, really sneaky. And sometimes it can show up by us not confronting the reality of our business situation. I see this a lot on sales calls, all right, in particular, where someone will come on, they'll book a phone call with me to talk about their business and where they may potentially need some help. And when we start digging into the financials of their business, their client flow, their lead flow, their cash flow, people start to get really uncomfortable talking about the reality of their business numbers. And this is why I will always come back to, what are those metrics? What are they telling you? Are they where you want them to be? Because it can be really, really, really easy to make excuses and to bypass actually the reality of those numbers. The fact that you've had no one book a call with you in the last month, the fact that you've only had one client sign up, the fact that you're nowhere near hitting your monthly income goals again. Oh, but because it's COVID. Oh, but because of, all of these other reasons and excuses. All right. I see this a lot. And so it can make people feel really uncomfortable to look at the business reality of what's going on in their companies. All right. So this is sort of one way that it really does play out. Also, just by ignoring what's not working, which is kind of related to what I just said, but that might be ignoring what's not working around your messaging, for example, or in your communities or the channels that you've created. Is your content really landing with your audience, or isn't it? And just sort of really paying attention to what's landing with your audience, but also what feels really good to you too. Are you just showing up because you think that's what's expected of you? Are you sharing a message because actually that's what your coach told you to share? And are you just almost showing up as like a bit of a robot kind of thing, rather than someone that's really deeply connected to the truth of what they're here to bring? So we can kind of bypass, because it's like, well, actually, I'm just kind of going to ignore my truth, and I'm just going to show up in a way that sort of feels good in the moment, but kind of doesn't really, because this is kind of what's expected of me. All right. So we can really enter into bypassing in business by not confronting the reality of our numbers, by looking at or ignoring what's not working, but also even things like rebelling against advice or structures and things too. And I've spoken a little bit about this in the past, but sometimes we want to bypass what will actually work and sort of proven methods or step-by-step roadmaps and plans. And look, this isn't about cookie cutter, but sometimes there are just strategies that work, and there are some things that we need to do to set up a really good framework and a really good solid foundation in our business. But we can often find ourselves rebelling against some of those more structural masculine elements of the business too, because it doesn't feel good. Okay, that doesn't feel good. I don't want to do that stuff. I just don't like systems. I'm not good at tech. And actually, this can be a form of bypassing, because what it's going to do is keep you stuck in that state of not seeing any progress in your business by constantly just being in that energy of sort of flow and just doing whatever anytime without any real underpinning masculine structures in your business. I always talk about bringing the feminine and the masculine energies together and how you need both to be successful in business. But sometimes by ignoring the automation, ignoring the technology, ignoring the systems and structures, and almost rebelling against the advice around those things, can actually also be a way of bypassing too. Another way that I'll sort of talk about, so the final way that this sort of shows up in business, is by not taking action and kind of blaming the external events that are happening around you for why you're not seeing results. So if I sort of look at not taking action, a really classic example of this that I see is people constantly journaling on their big dreams and visions and what they want to create for their business, creating different offers or creating ideas for offers. And okay, well, I'm going to create this new program and it's going to be amazing. And this is who it's going to be for. And this is what I'm going to include it. And all it ever does is stay in your journal. That is a form of bypassing, my friend. Okay, because what you're not doing is picking that up and grounding it into reality and putting it into the hands of people who need it most. So we can kind of fool ourselves into thinking that we're taking action in the moment because we're scribbling down the ideas. But actually, if it just stays as an idea, that's not real action. All right, so that can definitely be a form of bypassing. Then blaming the external, kind of like I was saying before, oh, well, it's been the pandemic and COVID and I haven't been able to travel, or people aren't buying at the moment. We can often blame external circumstances or factors or people for why things aren't quite working, as a way to really sidestep our role in a situation, or for us having to actually take action and move forward. So for example, some of what I just said, but also it's not the right time. It's not the right time for me. I've been speaking to my spirit guides, or I've been speaking to whoever. And it's like, I've been getting the message really clearly, Amanda, that now is not the right time. for me to take action in my business. And there is definitely a time for us to really feel into what our guidance is around timing and action. But what I would really encourage you to do is ask yourself, have I been getting that message for like a long time now? Is it like never the right time? Let's be honest, because sometimes that is just a way for us to stop moving forward and to stop taking action and to stop us doing the really scary things, the perceived scary things that are actually going to move the needle in our business. So this is where, if we were to kind of lift up a little bit and go back to that whole avoidance piece, all right? Avoiding the sort of the deep discomfort that can come with really acknowledging our part in things, acknowledging the fact that maybe we don't want to take action, that we keep sabotaging, that we don't really want to acknowledge our own personal healing and the work that we've yet to do, or really just moving forward. This avoidance is real. And this is why bypassing exists in the first place, whether we blame spiritual reasons or whether we just stick our head in the sand or whatever it happens to be. Bypassing is very real. And another way that it really shows up is when we find ourselves focusing on those sort of breezy, airbrushed solutions and even affirmations without really doing the confrontation. Okay. Affirmations versus confrontation. Affirmations being, and I'm just going to, and this is no disrespect to any spiritual practice or people who use affirmations, because they can be really, really powerful. But affirmations just on their own, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this. All right. This repetitive kind of speech over and over and over again without really confronting the reasons why you're not doing this. Okay. What those blockers are, what those barriers are, what those subconscious beliefs are that are holding you back. It's only ever going to act as band-aids. All right. So this is where, and you guys know this if you've been following me for any amount of time, I'm big into doing the deeper work here, not as a way to escape, not as a way to bypass, but really being able to pull apart those blocks and move those barriers that are getting in the way of you moving forward. So it's really about confrontation, confronting these uncomfortable parts of ourselves. And yes, it may feel uncomfortable, it will feel uncomfortable, and it will feel overwhelming. But my advice to you is to start breaking it down piece by piece by piece. And this is really my advice to you off the back of this podcast. It's almost like make a list, start with a list, because when you can actually see things visually as well, I mean, that is a really, really powerful way of confronting, again, what's not working in your life, in your relationships, in your business. Have 3 columns: life, relationships, business. What's not working? All right. And so with that list, really feel into and think about, what have I been avoiding? Have I been avoiding actually having a conversation with my partner about the fact that this isn't working? Have I avoided looking at my business metrics? Have I been avoiding having a conversation with my parents because that's bloody uncomfortable? What are you putting off? Because you know what you're putting off. And even if even if consciously you can't sort of think, well, I don't think that I am avoiding anything, maybe feel more into the discomfort. What are the things that are making you feel really uncomfortable right now? If you're honest, hand on heart honest, in your relationship, in your business, life generally, where are those areas of discomfort? Where am I sticking my head in the sand? What am I ignoring? And what am I fighting against? Okay. When you can actually ask yourself these questions and write them down so you can see them visually, this is all about facing it. This is about no longer saying, I'm going to bypass this. I'm going to bypass this. No, 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 no. It's like, no, we're actually going to confront this, because when you confront it, this is the key to being able to transform it and move through it. Okay. And sometimes it can really help too, once you make that list of what have you been avoiding, or, where am I feeling discomfort, or where am I sticking my head in the sand, in my life or in my business, even sort of start to think about, what are those consequences that I've been avoiding? If, for example, I've been putting off looking at my business metrics, what are the consequences of actually putting that off? Does it mean that potentially you're missing opportunities for growth? Does it mean that you're leaving money on the table? What are the real consequences? Like, get really honest. What are the consequences of me sticking my head in the sand and bypassing this because it's uncomfortable, simply because it's uncomfortable. So getting really clear on what are those consequences, because that's going to give you that kind of that wake up call around taking action, because that really is the third and final step to this, which is, sure, maybe you've mapped out a lot of stuff there. Maybe your lists are like, really, really like a mile long kind of thing, but you don't need to do it all at once either. The most important thing is that you can see it. Seeing it, acknowledging it, and facing it, understanding the consequences of not taking action is a really huge part of contributing to no longer bypassing. All right. Doesn't mean that you've got to tick them all off at once and do everything tomorrow, but it's like you've got that list there. So it's about then saying, okay, well, how can I start to have those bold, courageous conversations with my partner? How can I start looking more and paying attention more to those metrics in my business? Who can help me with that in some cases? So who can help? How could I see this differently? What's my part in this too? So asking yourself some really powerful questions is also going to move you into action then too. All right, who can help me? How can I see this differently? What can I do differently? What's the next right action step that I could take around my relationship right now, or around my business right now, or not putting that offer out there right now because it's quote unquote not the right time? Okay, so this is really about confronting what scares you, confronting those difficult emotions, recognizing that sometimes in order to create the change that we really desire, we're going to have to pay the toll for that change. And that toll sometimes is discomfort. But it's also knowing and having faith that that discomfort or that toll that we need to play is really part of that higher purpose and that higher plan and vision that we have for ourselves and our lives. Because I know that if you're here and if you're in my audience, you're here to do extraordinary things. And that means taking extraordinary actions. Most people don't want to do this. Most people want to keep sticking their head in the sand and pretending that everything's okay. Meanwhile, months, years are passing by and they're no more happy and they're no more fulfilled in their lives than they were 10 years ago. I know that if you're on a growth journey, you're prepared to do what's uncomfortable sometimes, because sometimes that's the toll you have to pay to move forward. So I hope you enjoyed this episode today. Please, please, please drop your feedback below or send me a message. I would love to hear what your key takeaways are. Until next time, take care. Thanks so much for tuning in to the Big Talk podcast today. If you have enjoyed this episode, then please do leave us a review and share it with your friends. For further information about our programs and free content, head on over to lightpurposeliving.com. See you soon.